Hey guys, I'm Kristin Bingham,
I'm David Etheredge.
and we are professors here in the biology department at South Plains College. One of the things we've really noticed that our students maybe don't have enough information about and sometimes we struggle with is what does it mean to be a good student and what can you do to make sure you're successful as you come into our program. So we wanted to spend some time today just talking and visiting with each other about what we think are best practices and what we've seen be really helpful to some of our students so that we can help you do your best.
Exactly. We want students to succeed, and doing well in college is tough. And one of the things, the hurdles you have to jump is just good study skills and attitude and lots of things. So
Yeah.
thought we'd just touch on some very broad concepts of study techniques and just different things about college success.
Yeah. Well, so I've made some notes, and I know you have too. And I just, when I was thinking about what we wanted to talk about, we talked about the idea of what exactly is a good student. And when we talk about our students and how they are successful, one of the things that they rely on more than anything are good notes. And so studying your notes is one thing, but studying good notes is a little bit different. So what do you think are good notes?
There's a lot of topics to talk about here, and this is a great one to start with. Note taking is, well, it can drive you crazy because you've got a professor up in front of you talking really fast.
Yeah.
Yes, and you
Getting on tangents and telling
exactly.
stories.
So it's just part of what we do. So sometimes it's hard, well, one, to know what to write down, and one, do we try to write everything down? And you can't write everything down. Note taking is a skill that you develop. Do not try to write everything down. It'll drive you crazy. But what you have to do is once you do the notes within a reasonable time, usually right after class or close to it,
within a couple hours.
or close to it, is go sit down and rework those notes. Now, there's different levels of note taking, and we'll talk about that. One is in a classroom, sloppy, try your best to keep up. The other set is just to kind of synthesize on what you did, and then the third set we want to expand on is what we want to call study, or I call study notes.
Yeah, what you're actually going to spend the majority of your time with. And I think you hit on some really good points there. When we look at the time to study or start studying, it's not a week or two down the road or after 5 lectures and you're about to have an exam, because by then you've forgotten a lot of that detail. And so within a day, a couple hours on the same day is really the best time to begin this work, but it goes much further than
we can remember things, guys, but as time goes by, it's just hard to remember the details, and we're in a detail business.
We are.
And you guys headed for a science career, get used to it. So you've got to make yourself sit down and work on it. And it doesn't come naturally. Very few students it comes naturally. You have to work at it. So let's address the study notes for just a second.
Yeah.
One of the things I did in school forever ago, but it still counts, is take notes, go sit down, and just rework them, but rework them beautifully.
Oh, yes. Make them a work of art.
And I was telling Miss Bingham I was very much of a geek, and I still am, but I'd had to have a yellow paper, green pens, and just the right place to do it. And back in the day, it was drawing pictures and doing notes. Some of my students recently, I've stolen some of their notes because they were willing to share them. Just beautiful work on the computer with going and finding images on Google and putting them in in the appropriate place and making sure they own those notes. And it's not just, I'm gonna look over my notes, I hope I remember this. No, you make notes and it'll help you remember it.
And it's rewriting your notes. And one of the things we talked about was how much of biology is just repetition as a way to remember things. And, for me in college, I had to write things 3 times. And if I could write it 3 times, I could pretty much remember it forever. But it was the physical act for me of writing, of pressing on the paper, not typing. That doesn't do it for me. Some people it does, but I need that physical.
A lot of our younger students, sorry to say that in front of you, all of our younger students, I think tend to want to do that because it's just what they know, and it's fine. And that brings us to another point that ties into this. Passively studying, looking at flashcards, looking at notes, watching these videos that we're posting nowadays, just hoping you can remember it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Active study is exactly what the word implies. And I joke and I say all the time, well, studying is a 4-letter word. And they say, no, it's not. Well, it's work is what it is. It is an incredible amount of work, but you have to actively do it and don't expect it just to jump off the page. And something else, highlighting in the book doesn't do it for me.
No, it really doesn't.
It makes the book pretty.
I end up with a pink book is what happens.
Exactly. So you've got to do active things, blank sheets of paper, ever how you want to do it, and just spend some time
Well,
at it.
and so when you talk about like some of these active things, and I like the idea of being able to take the pictures, because even from our lectures, we put a lot of work into those
Oh,
lectures,
it's a
and we
ton.
carefully pick those pictures because we like them or whatever it is. But, having students input those into their notes, that's really cool, I think.
Well, it's something I recently did. I just got through writing a test this last couple of days, and I probably went and pulled 20, 25 pictures straight from my PowerPoint. If the students understood that picture, they could understand the concept. It's just part of what we do, guys. So.
And so I think studying those pictures and also drawing, we talked about how hand drawing your pictures, even though you may not be the best artist, I'm not the best artist, but we're not here to be artists. We're here to learn the concepts.
Well, I have a good explanation for that. When I was teaching non-majors, I would let the students make 3x5 cheat cards of views they would see through the microscope. They'd look through and see an amoeba, and they'd draw the amoeba. And they'd come in with a test with a stack of cards, and it was so fun to watch them. They rarely used their cards because they worked hard doing it. And, oh, that's an amoeba. I don't even need my card. So it was kind of cool to see it because you're kind of tricking them. Taking a test is not learning. The preparation is learning. So there's lots of different ways to approach it.
And so, we've talked a little bit about what your notes are in this transition that needs to happen from your in-class notes to the notes you're actually going to use. Let's talk more about that process of the transition. So where would you like to study? So tell me about your study habits and how you get to that process of those notes.
When I was in school, and honestly, even today, if I've got something I really need to concentrate on, I'm pretty much a loner. I prefer to be by myself. That doesn't mean groups don't work. I did study in groups in college, and I have great memories of that. And honestly, some success with that. But the place to study, to me, is crucial. Now, I know Miss Bingham, because I've heard her talk about it before, which she'd study at her house, in the bedroom, maybe at the kitchen table, or wherever. That never worked for me. I tell a funny story, and I like the story. When I went to school at Angelo State, in the library, there was a bunch of tables, and there was one over in the corner that was my table. I claimed it. And honestly, probably every test I took there, with the exception of a few that I didn't do well on, I just lived there. And yes, I had a place. I had an apartment on campus, and it was close, but I was happier there. And you've got to find that place because it's one of those things that almost sets the tone for what you need to do. It's work, and this is my place. Yeah. And I'll tell you a funny story that I shouldn't tell, but I remember one time going downstairs with a pile of stuff ready to study, and somebody had the nerve to be sitting at my table. And I remember that bothering me. And I literally went and sat and pouted and glared at them until they got up, because what else was I going to do? There was another perfectly good table. I couldn't use that table. And it's silly, but to this day, that place meant something. And it still does. So you find a place you're good at, and usually it's not the places that have the everyday distractions of the living room with the TV, the kitchen table with someone cooking behind you. Maybe you're by yourself, but I don't need to be in the kitchen. I'll be eating. It's just one of those things. You've just got to find it, and you've got to find, in my opinion, yes, I'm old and old-fashioned, but that's okay, is you've got to find it with no distractions. I have 3 children, and my middle son swore he could study with headphones on. He couldn't study with headphones on. His grades showed that, by the way. But anyway, it's one of those things where you've just got to get to a place, and it's different for all of us. Tell us about your experience.
So particularly in undergrad, I like to study at home because I was married, so my husband and I, so we were alone together, and he worked a lot. And so I was alone there, and it was quieter there than I could find at the library or in any of the buildings on campus. And so I would get on my bed, and I like to spread everything out so I can look at all the things at the same time and kind of synthesize the information that way. So I did like to study at home. I felt like that was where I was most comfortable, and so I could really dig in and focus, but without worrying about what was going on around me or listening to people talk, because I'm very easily distracted. And I think it's the idea of finding somewhere you're comfortable, making a space your own, regardless if it's where you live or not, but also that idea of minimizing distractions. We live in a world today where there are times where you can't get away from those distractions unless you make it a priority. And so, regardless of where you study, you have to decide if this is the time, and I'm one of those people who counts my minutes because I get overscheduled and I commit to lots of things, but if this is the time that I have planned that I'm going to study, and you've got a plan and it's got to be a priority, well, then you need to follow through with that priority and, turn your phone off, set it to airplane mode, put the computer, no 15 tabs open. It's just the one thing you're working on, and turn off your notifications so you can make the most of that time.
It boils down to discipline, and discipline's hard for all of us. No matter what stage of life you're in prioritizing things, it's discipline. Yeah. One of the things too that I worry about a lot with students, and I don't know if this was something you got into, but I learned as a student, and I particularly see in all my students, if someone comes and tells me, oh, I studied all night, I'm instantly worried. Yeah. That's not good. I studied for all afternoon, 4 or 5 hours. Well, the problem with that is we, as humans, we don't have this huge attention span. Now, we need to talk about two aspects of that. The studies show 25, 30 minutes we're going down. Yeah. Our lectures are not 25 or 30 minutes. And we don't stop 25 minutes and say, go take a break. We keep rocking and rolling. Welcome to science. And by the way, you guys headed to medical school, physical therapy school, and pre-pharmacy, all those health major type things, as well as biologists, whatever. They're not going to have short little lectures. No. You're going to have to be disciplined. But anyway, back to my point. Try to study in increments and pieces so that you can break it up and then do something fun for just a little while and come back. It's not punishment to study. No. It's actually cool once you figure out the techniques and you learn how to do it, and it becomes something you're very proud of. So in little pieces, does that make sense?
And then little rewards.
Yes,
go get a snack. That's the time whenever you've gotten, I like to break things up into concepts or units or just, a piece that makes sense to my brain, not necessarily like set a time or anything.
Yep, that's a good
and so whenever I finish a particular concept or something I'm doing, then I might go on my phone and check my notifications or, get on some social media and look at videos or whatever I'm going to do. But that becomes a reward. So then I'm like, okay, I can get through the next block, and then I'll come back and finish this conversation.
And that's a good point too. Most of what we teach is very structured. You can study this, and it's a piece, and you can learn it. Yes, you have to apply it, but it does have natural breaks in it.
Does.
Use those natural breaks.
And something that's good is we record our material, and something I think has always been really helpful. I figured it out because I'm a little bit of a daydreamer in class. I don't know if you were ever like that, but
I'm sure
after somebody drones on for about 45 minutes, you're like, I'm hungry, or I'm real bored, or I'm very tired, right? And so, one thing I really tell my students is if you're in class and you're trying to take those good notes in class and stay with it, and you realize that you've drifted away, when you snap back and you're like, oh, I'm still here. Oh, dang, they're still talking. Make a mark in your notes just so you can be like, okay, wherever this star is or this line, I know that before that line, I really need to go back and listen to the recording for that information because I missed it, and that might be important. And so it's, so much of this about being a good student and studying and all of these things is about being very honest with yourself and saying, I know I tend to do this, so here's how I'm going to plan for that and remediate it in many cases.
It's funny, I didn't learn to study till I was a junior. Don't do that. Because somehow I survived, I don't know how, a couple of years. But I went off to university. I went to community college, and I went off to university, and the very first test, I just massively failed. And the scariest part about failing that test was the professor wrote at the top of the paper, David, come see me.
Ooh, yeah.
And I barely knew the guy. Come to find out, become a lifelong friend and love him dearly. But what happened was it was a wake-up call for me, and I shouldn't have had to have that at that point. So, but what's cool is once you get your study skills refined, and they're never always perfect, it becomes something you're really proud of. I mean, it's odd to say, but I'm very proud of the ability, one, you survive school, and two is you have the ability to discipline yourself to do really well in some things, and some things not so good. I had classes that I struggled with no matter what, just because I wasn't quite geared. Physics, let's not talk about physics. But anyway, it's something we survive, but that's
scholarship, and that's what we're here for, is to be scholars and learners, and that takes work. If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Yes, and that's a good statement there. But one of the things too it is a huge hurdle for a lot of young students to jump, is if you take and learn facts. So if Miss Bingham's going to teach you the skeletal system, she's going to say, hey, this is the humerus right here, and your femur's down here. That's a fact. It's probably not going to change, guys. But it's different if she's going to teach you the physiology of that. How the bone grows and everything associated with that. That's different. So facts are one thing. And we're covered up in facts in science. And facts is a funny word in science. Factoids.
Trivia.
That's a better word for it. Yeah. But the reality is what I'm trying to get at here is that concepts are what we do. And I have so many students that know their facts or their little factoids. and they can't put it together. Like I have students come in with a stack of flashcards and, they know all of them. But can they make sense out of the concept? Please listen to me. The concepts are the key things in science. We can look up facts. That's why we have Google. That's why we have other things. If you understand the general concept and you feel comfortable with the basic concept, the big picture of it, the little nuts and bolts of it, that's fine. We all forget that. Even as teachers, we have to go learn some of those things again. But pay attention to concepts. Don't just learn facts. If you can't explain it, which leads us to another point we need to talk about, the ability to teach it to someone, to recite it to someone is a big deal. I was telling Miss Bingham the other day, I had a fellow I know here in town that I saw one day like at the feed store, and he said, I'm so sick of you. And what did I do? He said, my daughter, every evening at the supper table, tells us your lectures. I'm so sick of hearing you about what you say. Well, what's cool, I just love that story, because if she's sitting there saying, here's what I learned in science today, and it's cool, she's learning it. Teach somebody. Bore a parent to tears. Bore your dog to tears. Yeah. Whatever it takes. I think that's a good way to do it.
Talk to yourself in the mirror.
Exactly, yeah.
If you can explain it, you know it. And you'll get to a point where you think you know it and you try to explain it and you learn real fast. Okay, I'm a little sketchy here. I need to go back and work on this. So I think one of my favorite memories is of some of my students down the hall teaching each other before going into a Majors 2 exam and just being able to stand there and listen to it. One of the things I think is important, and you kind of spoke to this a moment ago, but just to reiterate it, is whenever we think about what's happening, in courses like the ones we teach here at South Plains, we're teaching freshman level science courses, and they are your beginning science courses. And some people will come in and they'll breeze through, and that's okay, but that's not typical. That's not even most people. That's like an exception to the rule. And so I think it's important, when we're talking about setting priorities and making space and making time for your coursework and your studies that you're doing, I think it's important to understand how critical this time is in your development as a scholar and as a student. When you look at the courses you're taking here, like Biology 1 and 2 for majors, like Gen Chems and things like that, these are the foundation of an education that's going to build on top of it. And the example I use a lot in class is like an onion, right? You start on the outside, you've got all these layers before you get to the very center. Well, the courses that we're teaching and the material we're teaching, that's the outside of the onion. We're just barely dipping our toe into some of the really interesting processes. But it is critical that you learn them now, because whenever you move on to a junior level course or a sophomore level course at your four-year institution, they're not going to go back and explain these basic concepts to you. They expect you to have mastered them in this course so that they can go in like cell biology, that lecture on respiration, that is kicked up like 100 degrees.
Well, think about genetics. We'll teach genetics in majors for 3 to 4 weeks, and then your junior year, you're taking a course in
It's
genetics.
a whole semester, 3 months.
Yeah,
and
so
what we cover is like
first
the
week.
welcome.
Exactly, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, that idea of, I can cram and I can make a decent grade. Yeah, you might. It's not going to go well for you in the long term. It's not good for you, right? Health-wise or academically. But you need to be able to draw on at least a comprehension of those concepts as you get to that upper level coursework. That's what's going to make you stand out in the crowd. That's going to be the key to undergraduate research opportunities, to scholarships, to field trips where we take you out in the middle of nowhere and teach you how to do cool stuff. That is how you make your impression on your professors and develop those relationships so that you have those opportunities earlier and you're not waiting until grad school to do a lot of those things.
Yes, no, exactly. It's, it's work, it's discipline, and it builds for your future, which is what we're here for. It's what it's about.
It is. And I think it's interesting. I think as a professor, my style is very enthusiastic. I'm very much kind of in your face, and I'm excited, and I love science, and that's who I am. You are very much a drawer in. Like, you tell really good stories and pull people in, and you're not as shouty and gestury as me.
No.
And that's okay.
That's okay, yeah.
But we have different styles, but we do very similar work. there will be professors you take that bore you to tears. That's
We've had
okay.
'em.
Luck of the draw, right? But the thing to remember is you're here for the information. And so those notes that you're taking, that book that you're reading, that information is what's most important. So we want to make sure that we stress to you guys, find a way to make that information make sense to you. Find a way to be able to back up and see the big picture, because I'm a big picture kind of girl. I want you to know why this is important. We talked about that. Why do we care if you know this material? It's not because it makes us feel good.
I say that almost every lecture. Why do we care, guys? And just stare at my students, because there's got to be a reason why we're doing it.
Why would I talk to you about this for 20 minutes? Well, because it's important and you need to know it, not just because I think it's important and I want you to know it, but because it may show up on an MCAT exam.
It's a step.
It may, it's something that you're going to need. So pay attention to those kinds of ideas as you're going through your notes.
And developing these skills, not just for your undergraduate work, for taking tests like the MCAT, for you guys that are headed for graduate school, is when you get to graduate school and you develop these skills, graduate school is a blast.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where you have that whip, and yes, it still work, but it's different.
But you know how to do it. By that point, you're like, okay,
I know. Whatever.
I can do this, and I can still have a good time doing it. So,
Exactly.
can we talk about having good communication with professors? I think that anybody who is a quote-unquote good student, as hard as it is, you've got to be willing to step out of your bubble and have that connection with your professor. And I feel like we try to make it easy, but
It's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
We do make it easy because we'll talk to them and we'll learn their names the first or second day and call them by name. And it's not to irritate them; it's to make them understand we can communicate in class.
Yeah. And we want to know about you, and we want to get to know you, and we want you guys to be successful.
Absolutely.
But I think that really stuck out to me as something that I would want a student to do, is just feel like they could come to me for whatever they need, even if it's just to tell me about a cool podcast they heard or a video they saw on YouTube. But I feel like having that ability.
Just don't be afraid to talk to your teachers.
Yeah.
And I think you'll be pleased that, because that's we're funny. We do our jobs, and sometimes we're not quite sure how it went, and the satisfaction of someone coming back and saying, okay, let's talk about that some more.
Yeah.
Or let's talk about the future and talk about whatever. It's a cool thing.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid.
Absolutely.
Okay, for sure.
So, so we've talked a little bit about notes. We've talked a little about study habits. Do we need to hit anything else there?
I think I think we did a pretty good job there. I think learning concepts instead of just facts is huge for me. The time you spend, the place you're at, the place you choose to be. And something else too, guys, it's one thing, because we hear a lot of students say, I just don't have time. And I understand. We both went to school.
Yeah.
We both had jobs during the school. We were both married during school, not to each other, but we were both married. So we had responsibilities. Time is hard, but when you think about it, you're building for the future. And I always say to my students, well, I know time's tough, but make the time. They look at me kind of funny. You got to carve it out.
You do. And I think you would be surprised if you go through and kind of analyze your day and really chunk out what you're spending your time on. You're like, okay, well, maybe I had 30 minutes there. I was on, TikTok watching movies or videos. I could be doing something.
It's kind of a classic thing to say, but you do have time to do things. It's just what you're spending on now is a pretty important investment for the future. It
is. So. And like I said before, this is that foundation that's going to get you into the field or the career that you really want to be in. And, the thing about biology is science is interesting and it's fun, and it can be, the thing that just tickles your brain and you're like, wow, this is so cool. But you've got to have that time invested to get to that point where you realize it almost. You've got to really get in there, and then you start realizing what's going on and seeing that big picture. You're like, wow, this touches everything. And so I think finding that natural curiosity we have can really help. If you're interested in nutrition, well, you will really like the lectures on cellular respiration, because that's all that process. And so then you can go in and say, well, what about this? Well, how does this happen? Well, what happens if we change this molecule? And so it's part of trying to find what interests you about that material and really focusing on that, regardless if everything else is just boring you to tears. But making that priority, that just goes back to that same idea.
And it sounds like almost repetitious in a sense, but it's not rocket science. It's not. But one of the things, too, that I think we've got to talk about before I forget, or we forget, is I had a really good friend in school, and we would study together, and he was way more intelligent than I ever wished to be or hoped to be. But come test time, he had true test anxiety. Now, we hear about test anxiety a lot. Now, sometimes it's real, and I don't want to diminish anyone that says they have it, but the reality, at least what I see a lot of times, is the students have it because they're so anxious, they're geared that way anyway, and we're geared that way. But all of a sudden, you put on top of that a lot of material, and maybe they've got 2 jobs, and they've got family obligations or whatever. Test anxiety also manifests itself in the form of just not being confident, not feeling good about where you're at. You may have studied 10, 12, 14, 18 hours for a test, but you still come in and almost freak out. Is that a good word for it?
That is, yeah.
And you've got to figure out a way to do that. In my experience, at least for some people, maybe I'm not going to say most, but for some, when you work and study and you're proud of your study habits and you've developed them and you feel good about what you're doing and you've taught your dog and you've done everything you need to do, your confidence leads toward a lower anxiety on the test.
Yes.
And then that leads toward, okay, I can calm down. Then there's techniques. There's all kinds of techniques to when you're taking a test about how to approach it. But the bottom line is preparation goes a long way.
And I think, that's a big idea. There are some things anxiety-wise we can overcome by just being prepared. And so if you have put in
Excuse me.
That's okay. If you have put in the work every week, to review that material, to work on your notes, meeting with your study group, whatever it is you're doing, if you've done that for every week up to the exam, you have put in the work to prepare. And when you go into those exams, or as you call them, you don't even call them exams, do you? What do you call them?
Well, academic opportunities.
Academic opportunities. I said that to my class the other day. I was like, are you ready for your academic opportunity?
There you go.
I don't know if they appreciate that, but I mean, that even that phrasing can do something to help lift that anxiety to a degree. And we try to create a space where people are very comfortable. And I know that as a professor, and I know you do this because you did, but you go around and you help and say, and I write fill in the blank questions, which, when I write them, I think they are beautiful and like the most well thought out, like chef's kiss. They are the best questions ever. And then in the exam, a student will be like, Miss Bingham, is this English? What are you doing? And I'll be like, I'm sorry. Yeah. But it's that idea of being comfortable in a place and figuring out how to manage your anxiety. One of the things I have found is, I'll tell you 2 things. One thing I think is really important, and it's a life skill we teach that we don't really know we're teaching sometimes, and maybe we're not talking enough about it, but it's confidence in yourself. It's that idea of trusting your gut.
Trusting yourself, yeah.
And that gut part of your body, can you point to your gut? Do you know exactly what your gut is? Usually, no. People are like, well, it's my gut. Yeah. But it's this primitive part of our brain that it's like when you're in danger, but you don't see you're in danger. You've got to trust your instincts. And when you are taking an exam, if you've done that work and you've prepared, you need to give yourself credit for that and say, I am ready for this. And I saw one of my students on their notes page for the exam, I let them use a piece of paper that their notes are on. It had a little thing at the top that said, you can do this. Made my heart so happy. But it's that awesome idea of figuring out, I can do this. I'm smart and I've worked hard and I know what I'm talking about. And it's hard because it's almost like ripping off a Band-Aid. You gotta be like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And you just read the question and the first answer that comes to your mind, you're like, that's it. And I'm not going to question myself. I'm not going to go back and play this game with myself of, is that right? Well, maybe this one's right. You can't do that. At some point, you have to trust yourself and have to believe in yourself that you've done as much as you can to be prepared and you're going to go with it wherever it goes. So I think that's a huge deal. And it goes back to that idea of ownership over your notes and your studies. And if you've done that, that plays right into that idea of learning to trust yourself, which is really important if you want to be a surgeon. I mean, I want you to trust yourself. So I want you to learn how to do that now.
Yes, no, good point.
So,
go ahead.
I will tell you one strategy I found on test anxiety that I think really helps for students who, if you're taking an exam and you're looking at a multiple choice question, whenever you see those choices, that's where we get into that kind of spiral of, oh, it could be this, or oh, it could be that, or heaven forbid, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We don't want to be in that world. Yep. So one thing I've started telling my students, if you'll just, when you're taking your exam, roll the bottom of your paper up and cover up the answer choices so you just see the question. then read the question and answer it in your head and say, okay, well, I know that when glucose is broken down in glycolysis, it produces 2-pyruvate or whatever, right? You go through it and recite what you studied in your brain, and then you read the question, figure out your answer, then pick the best fit. So that you're not giving yourself that opportunity to be tempted into, is it this, is it that? So that's one way you can try.
Well, you're looking at two people that are obviously passionate about student success, and we could sit here for another 3 hours because we want to help everyone in all the different circumstances and conditions. The bottom line is work hard, get involved, get to know your teachers.
Study.
And
Live
it's
in
fun,
that biology
and it's funny. I hope now with what you've heard us talk about, I hope when somebody says go study hard, sometimes I don't know what that means, but I hope now you've got a little better feel for what that means. It's so there's so much going on there.
And find people that are like-minded to
There
study
you go.
with.
There
You
you
know, you mentioned study groups a little while ago. When you look at a study group that's a really good group, what do you see in that group? What do you, I mean, when you've had students that are working together, what does that mean?
You usually have the leader of the group, and you have some that tend to follow. But however, what you'll find, and I've seen it with our guys, is you'll have them all involved equally, and they'll be sharing because they all have strengths. And I understood that. Here's what I understood. Oh, you're right. It's really fun and it's really cool. And honestly, it takes a lot of the quieter, shyer kids that want to do really well, the students that want to do really well, but they tend to be kind of shy anyway. It pulls them out of that a little bit, and that's important. And even though you may not be the leader of the group, just being there and hearing it helps.
Yes.
And surrounding yourself by people that are like-minded and the same attitude and the same motivation.
They have the same goals. That are not there for social hour, but that are serious about their studies and are there because they're trying to make an A. Those are the people you want to study with, and you want to make sure that y'all are all moving in the same direction. And one of the things that I've loved seeing over the years is how groups of students who meet in Majors 1 form study groups and then move through Majors 2, and then we hear that that same study group is together in organic chemistry, or they're at Texas Tech taking genetics together.
Recently we received a picture of like 5 of our students in one group over at Tech. They're still together.
Yeah. And you end up building, you know, like you were saying, you make some friendships and you build relationships, but you also build a group of people who are going to move through the same program as you. You're going the same pathway, regardless if you're pre-med or biology, right? So you can work with those people and develop a group that works together regardless of the course, regardless of the year, and you're all on the same page, and you can keep pushing each other to be excellent in your studies.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a huge deal. So find people, and even if you're a loner, even if you like to study alone, still attending things like review sessions. We love review sessions.
Absolutely.
Come to review sessions, meet with your friends, just do something with that information so that it's not sliding away.
You know, I have students showing up to study sessions all the time and never say a word. Fine.
That's okay.
Because they'll gain from being there just by hearing the other questions. Just do what works.
And even on Zoom, I do a lot of Zoom review sessions, and I love it because I can have chat box questions. So,
Exactly.
Or, you know, something in regular sessions, and this is an idea if you have a professor that maybe you don't feel comfortable talking to in person, I always welcome my students to email me. You know, if you have questions, but you really don't want to ask them in class, you're always welcome to email me after class and say, hey, could I get some clarification here?
Absolutely.
And so use this technology that we live with and make these things your tools for doing better in your coursework. So,
Absolutely.
well, I think we've covered a lot of really good information.
Really good information. There's more, and we would love to sit down with anybody that wants to sit down one-on-one as well. But
bring us your notes. Let us look at them. Let us show you what bad notes look like. I took horrible notes for a while because I would just rewrite the textbook. That's not helpful. And so let us show you what bad notes look like and what good notes look like. And it's not that, you know, we could give you a student's notes from a previous semester, like our friend Hannah.
I've done that, yes.
And it's not that we're giving you, you know, something to study and say, here, if you just study this, you're going to get the best grade ever. But we have examples that we'd love to share with you and, you know, help you grow in this way.
And the examples show what it took for that particular student to make an A. You looking at her notes doesn't mean you're going to make an A, but what it means is the work she put in, the hours she put in. You know, when there's 29 pages of notes for one unit in our biology class, that's a lot of notes.
That's a lot of notes, but
But it's what it took.
It's work, yeah. Tell me, we tend to be, I think, more visually oriented people.
Big time.
What tips do you give your students who are more auditory learners? Have you ever kind of delved into that at all?
I don't know. I'm so visual. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that because, every image we use, every bad drawing I do on the board, whatever it takes. I would have been a great kindergarten teacher because I have this, well, we both do, this box of teaching aids. It's everything from kids' toys to ropes to
magnets, lots of magnets. We like those.
So a lot of visual aids.
Yeah.
I'm so visual. We're so visual. Straight auditory would be a struggle for me.
It is, and I think that those students really benefit from our recordings.
I agree, and we do that.
And I miss our MP4 recording or MP3 recordings where we just did audio, but one thing that I found was really helpful was telling students, if you can get that audio and put it on your car speakers.
There you go.
That drive back and forth between Lubbock and Levelland.
Good point.
It's a 30-minute drive of pretty much nothing to look at. Maybe a bird every once in a while.
Maybe,
but,
yeah.
you shouldn't bird while driving. But that's a pretty,
That's a good point.
that's a long drive, and you can listen to a chunk of a lecture, and particularly if you're going several days a week, that's...
Because we recorded lectures forever up until COVID time. And I remember walking into my lecture one day and a kid was in there by himself and he had me going on his phone. I thought, oh, I didn't want to hear that. But it was cool because he was listening to the previous section. And he'd been there too.
Yeah.
It's not like he had missed it. It was just part of what he was doing.
Well, and I told, if you like the soothing sounds of Miss Bingham, maybe you could play this as you go to sleep. I mean,
that would be good. Yeah,
whatever it is that works for you, it goes back to that idea of finding your minutes that you can dedicate to studying, and that's really passive studying, but you're still thinking about it.
Oh,
you're
sure.
still getting it reiterated. So
when you start dreaming about your classes, I've done that a lot. You'll
that
know
happens.
Yes, that happens. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
well, guys, thanks for joining
Thank
us
you.
today. We enjoyed.
Yes,
I enjoyed this.
and
Thanks for
I
sitting down with
hope
me.
the time was valuable to you. Absolutely, I enjoyed it. I appreciate the invite. But just let us know what we can do and just work hard.
Okay,
Bottom
come
line.
see us.
Thanks.
Bye.